It's nice to see lots of old friends and acquaintances in the audience today. Thank you for coming out to TLT this year and for participating, getting involved, and being part of the movement in making learning technologies more, I guess, in a greater spot in our institutions. We're fortunate to have some wonderful keynote speakers for this conference, and we're also fortunate, I think, to have an opportunity to come together and share information and resources and ideas with one another in a situation of this sort of intimacy. On behalf of the University of Saskatchewan, I'd like to welcome you here. I'm not necessarily a spokesperson for the University of Saskatchewan, but as the director of our University Learning Centre, it is, I guess, our honor to be host for this year's conference. And I also want to mention that it is because of a partnership that we have with other institutions, with U of R, with SciAst, that makes this kind of event possible. So I thank you for coming out today, and I welcome you here to the campus. For those of you who are infrequent visitors to our campus, welcome back. And I'm confident that this is going to be a wonderful event for us all to enjoy. I'm going to ask Heather Ross, our program chair, now to come up and introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Jim. It is my pleasure to introduce George Velasquez this afternoon. Dr. George Velasquez is an assistant professor of learning technologies at the University of Texas, Austin. He is the author of Emerging Technologies in Distance Education, this book. Great book if you haven't read it yet. There is a link from his bio on our website to actually download this, either individual chapters or the entire thing as a PDF, because it's released from Athabasca Press, so you can go get the whole thing for free if you want. He is making a move and leaving the University of Texas at Austin. In September, he will be taking up an appointment as a Canada Research Chair at Royal Roads University in British Columbia. And on that, I give you George.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. Thank you for the invitation to speak and for welcoming me. Everyone has been so gracious, and it's been a wonderful experience so far. I appreciate you finding the time to get together with everyone and share and talk about the issues that are important to us. My talk today will bring together a number of themes or ideas that have been coming up during my research. They've been reoccurring, if you will, regardless of the technology, regardless of how things change or stay the same. My work is situated around emerging online practices. I study people's experiences in online social networks, in open courses, in environments that we design for specific purposes. And as I study these things and as they change, I picked out a number of ideas that are re-emerging, if you will, and I'll be sharing those with you today. Just some programming notes, I guess. The U of S guest network can be used with the password TLT 2013. And then if you're tweeting, the hashtag for the conference is TLT13. So the first, tell number 0 that I'm going to share is really about me, so I'm cheating a little bit, and I want to do this just to give you an idea of how my background and experiences are impacting the way that I view the world. So I grew up in Cyprus, which is a small island in the Mediterranean, and my parents always insisted on me going to college. And from a young age, I was made to believe that I was going to go to college, and that happened. So my dad is a retired police officer, and my mom is a stay-at-home parent, and she's a refugee in her own country, and that had taught me a lot. So while she was staying at home and taking care of us, she was making sure that we were getting the education that we needed. So Cyprus looks like this in the summer. Actually looks like this in the winter as well, but maybe with less tourists. But we stay connected in our family via Skype, and I often joke that Skype has changed the way that I connect with my family. And that's my mom giving her best conference face. My dad is camera shy, and you can see his shoulder there. But I bought a personal computer when I was 15. It was just a machine where I could type my homework. And it was never connected to the internet. Actually, we didn't have internet at home until maybe 10 years ago, and that was a modem connection. So not a digital native by any means. But as I was growing up and as I was in college, I got introduced to MySpace and Facebook, and all those things. And those arose kind of while I was doing my PhD. So, unlike lots of youngsters now, my access to technology growing up was pretty sporadic. I was at the University of Minnesota for my master's and PhD degree, and then moved to Manchester in the UK and taught for about a year and a half. And I've been at the University of Texas at Austin for 3.5 years. The University of Manchester and the University of Texas at Austin are all large research-intensive institutions. So I think of 40,000 students, 50,000 students. Just to give you an idea, there were 50,000 students that applied this year at the University of Texas at Austin to be in the freshman class. So other than that, I do a little bit of amateur photography. I added this slide to kind of show you guys what you're looking forward towards, because I know that we had a rough winter. So I just wanted to make sure that this is coming. But I empathize, being at the university. Oops, that's my cat. But being at the University of Minnesota, I empathize with the cold, and I understand what northern climates are like. But going back to my photography, oftentimes my pictures are bad, and this is what happens when you work with a cat in the house. But let's go back to our topic. So, social media and learning. Today, I'll be talking about that, and the questions that interest me are essentially, what is it that we do in these spaces? What is our lived experience in these spaces? How do we experience interactions with others in an online space? What does that mean for education and learning? What is it like to use social media for learning? And what can we learn about the human condition? So as you can see from the picture here, we're all part of different social groups, different social networks, our college friends, our family, our personal interests, and so on. So from a macro perspective, we make up different social groups, and we are part of different social groups. So I'll focus on 3 topics, and I consider myself a qualitative researcher. So what does that mean? In addition to the fact that I spend hours and hours trying to make sense of data, I come to you with the worldview that there's no single truth to a phenomenon. There's multiple ways to see things, and there's multiple ways to understand the world. So for example, there's been a lot of conversation about MOOCs, right? Massive open online courses, and a lot of them have been critiqued because the majority of the students that sign up for them don't finish them. And I'm one of them. I've signed up for a lot. I've dropped out from a lot. But calling the individuals that drop out of these courses as dropouts is only one way to see the world, right? That's just one perspective. We could also call them content explorers, or we could call them curious, or students who did not receive the support that they needed, so they dropped out. We could call them a lot of things. So the world is filled with multiple truths and multiple realities. And there's tensions between the world that are not necessarily clear-cut. So in our case here, I'm going to talk about social media use that's guided by an enthusiasm for the technology and for what it brings. I'm going to talk about social media as tools to question the scholarly enterprise and what it is that we do on a day-to-day basis and what the university values. I'm also going to talk about social media as transformative technology. And you put these 3 things together, you can see that there are already some tensions that are rising there, right? In our work, we try to define this idea of educators, researchers, and scholars participating online as networked participatory scholarship, largely because we want to focus on the idea of scholarship online as a network phenomenon, as a participatory phenomenon, and understanding through that lens. So here's my first story. My physician and I have an interesting relationship, to put it mildly. I tend to research my ailments before I go visit him on WebMD, and he doesn't necessarily like that. So, he might say do X, and I might say, well, can I not exercise more, or eat less chicken? And, we have that back and forth. But I was at his office a few weeks ago, and we got to talk about my work. And for some reason, I don't know how it came up, but I told him that I do research on online education. And for those of you that have been in the field for a while, you probably know that then you have to go explain to people exactly what it is that you do, right? Because they don't usually understand. But not in this case. So at that moment, it was as if we had found this golden thread that connected us. Because for the next 20 minutes, he was lecturing me about educational technology and about how his children were using Khan Academy to learn all these things, and about how the iPad has all these games that are changing the ways that, that his children are learning. So after that lecture about the benefits of technology to education, I thought, this is interesting that I'm here. He doesn't appreciate the fact that I do research on WebMD, but all of a sudden he's an expert on educational technology. And I feel like I've been getting that a lot recently. So I don't blame the good doctor, but he probably got carried away because of the excitement that his children are taking advantage of these opportunities. But it seems that we as researchers and educators have also fallen prey to expecting that technology is going to solve the problems that we're facing. With respect to scholarly practice happening online, for example, here's a couple of claims that have arisen. One is this idea of participatory internet technologies having the potential to change the way that we engage in scholarship, or that technological changes are going to change how we do and represent research. So there's a narrative that's emerging here, right? A narrative that technology may solve the problems that scholars are facing, a narrative that technology is our solution, and that it will help us improve scholarly practice on a number of levels. So that's a narrative of technological solutionism, and Morozov discusses the idea of solutionism in his latest book, not necessarily for education, but for the solutions that technology will bring to society. The book is called To Save Everything, Click Here. And if you want a summary before reading it, you can look up Audrey Waters, and she has an excellent blog post essentially describing what this book is putting forward. But if you've been in education long enough, you will know that we have been cautious not to accept technology as a solution to our problems, as a silver bullet, right? But with the rise of edtech, with the rise of education entrepreneurialism, it seems that we have forgotten our past. We have gone through similar arguments before with motion picture, with the radio, TV, computers, internet, right? And history has shown that these grand visions about technology and education have not come to fruition. And this is another great text to explore. Tubman's Oversold and Underused essentially describes this phenomenon of putting computers into classrooms and what the outcomes have been. But I can hear a lot of you saying, why is this, right? Why, George, I thought that you're a cool kind of guy. I mean, you have a great tie. And you understand the technology. These machines are faster, they're better, they're networked, they're connected. Your iPhone is one of the most powerful machines that have ever been developed, and you have it in your pocket. Google Glass is going to change the way that we live. And I respond, yes, I can see that, right? I can see that these technologies are changing the way that we live. I'm not necessarily sure that they're changing the way that we're doing education, though. And I can see that there are issues in education that have nothing to do with the technology. Income inequality, policies, lack of training on how to appropriately integrate technology in the classroom or in online settings, all these issues, tenure and promotion policies at the university, right? All these issues impact how we integrate some of these tools and how we use them. So history is a great teacher, but it seems that, again, we've forgotten our history. Put differently, and going back to the idea of us viewing the world in different ways, individuals who have arrived at this field recently have rediscovered it without realizing its rich history. And this reminds me of Christopher Columbus, right? We have rediscovered something new. So Neil Selwyn puts this in a great way when he says that the current understanding of educational technology is a case of a curious amnesia or forgetfulness, willful ignorance perhaps, of how technology has been implemented and developed. And the question that we need to ask here is, why is this important, right? This is important because a lack of understanding of our history leads us to reinvent the wheel. It prevents us from learning from past mistakes of what has happened. And it leads us to create solutions that are essentially solutions to problems that don't exist. It may even lead us to create solutions, tools, technologies that are not aligned with the values of progressive ideals that we have come to develop over the years. And nowhere is this clearer than the meetings of educational technology business. So I was at a panel at South by Southwest EDU in March. I was in the audience, and this is the third year that this conference is happening. And it's a conference that brings together business people, education business people, and some educators and researchers. And this question came up during the panel, and the panelists said, do we care about learning outcomes? And then she said, of course we do. And she followed that by saying, once we make profits for our investors, we do care about learning outcomes because our mandate is profits, right? And these are the people that are developing the future of education. And I'll return to this point in a little bit. But this is why the history of the field is important. So the second story I'm going to share relates to open scholarship. And Valerie will talk more about openness tomorrow in her keynote and what that means and looks like. And make sure that you don't miss that because I've seen the slides and they're much better than these. So the image of the lonely scholar tirelessly working on his or her research in a tower somewhere is in stark contrast to the connected practices that we see online nowadays and the practice that I've encountered in my research. So the question that I've been trying to answer around this area is, what types of scholarly practices are made visible when academics participate online? So this really was an ethnographic investigation of practice of what it is that people do online. And here are some examples of things that I observed. Individuals announce publications, awards, job opportunities. They share drafts of manuscripts and request feedback and work with each other. They develop and release digital textbooks. They share syllabi and instructional activities. They live stream or share video from their teaching. They live blog and live tweet like we're doing right now. They author and write papers together that are publicly available that others can comment while they're writing that. They engage in debates and commentary. They open teach, so these are regular courses that include participation from individuals who are not signed up. And this really is, in lots of ways, a Canadian initiative, right? We're seeing MOOC platforms recently, but this has started right here in Canada with people like Alec Kouros, who's a neighbor, with people like George Zeman, Stephen Downs, Dave Cormier, and so on. Other activities, making public their tenure and promotion materials, seeking help from colleagues on various issues, especially in research and in teaching, and kind of reflecting and conversing about the doctoral process. But some questions that I'd like to ask here are the following. So does your institution support and encourage these, right? Why or why not? Are there incentives or rewards pertaining to these in tenure and promotion decisions? What do we gain by embracing these? What do we lose? Whose values do these represent, right? Are these the values that those that do open scholarship embrace? Well, I assume that they embrace this, but are they only those people's values, or are these values that the institution should embrace? So I want to focus on the doctoral journey, which is one practice that I saw enacted online a little bit. But this is the case of PhD Chat, which is a self-organized online community initiated by doctoral students. So individuals in this community use social media to update each other on their progress, to share resources, to learn about the profession, to socialize, to support each other. And this is a graph that was created by Casey Ford, one of my students who's doing her master's thesis on the topic. And it's a network analysis of individuals mentioning PhD Chat. As you can see, there are some core users, right? There's different little communities represented by the different colors. There's some people that exist on the periphery. But the question that I'd like to ask here is this group, is this network a result of the technology? Is this the result of Twitter being available? Or are we doing these things? Are we doing these things because of the technology, or are we just wanting to do these things and then technology is there? So if you think back to your statistics class, the statistician probably said, what's the cause and what's the effect? And just because some things are correlated doesn't mean that they're causal. So I believe that we've always had a desire to share through phones, through conferences, but the development of new technologies has allowed us to do that on a mass scale, right? The printing press allowed sharing. That meant that libraries were no longer areas where you could hold the community's knowledge. Knowledge could be disseminated on a larger scale. So technological, cultural, and social shifts had an impact on how we do our work, and partly it's clear now that we can network with each other on a global scale. In addition, individuals have appropriated some of these social technologies to find and share journal articles and research papers that relate to their work, but they've been quite creative in doing so. So reminiscent of peer-to-peer networks for music sharing, users have used things like pirateuniversity.org, the Paper Bay, the Scholar subreddit, for those of you that are on Reddit, to access scholarship that they need. On these websites, individuals request papers that they do not have access to, and colleagues from around the world that have access to these papers post it for them. So a student at the University of Saskatchewan might download a paper and post it there for a student at a small university somewhere that doesn't have access to that journal. Twitter has also been used to facilitate the sharing of some of these through the ICANN-has PDF hashtag. Again, that's my cat getting knowledge out of my computer. But it's the same way, right? So these activities are important, I think, because they suggest that individuals are willing and able to circumvent and defy the restrictions that are imposed to the sharing of knowledge and research. Kroll calls this an act of civil disobedience against the publishing enterprise. Because as you can imagine, there are individuals or companies that this practice would not bode well with them. So our third story has to do with a few related ideas. And the themes here are scholarly identity, democratization, control. And in two of our studies, we came across the idea of student-faculty relationships. So in one study, we asked individuals to use a social networking platform to teach their class. These individuals were faculty members at a college of education. These are progressive educators striving for equality, striving for embracing kind of the ideas of student-centered practices. So asking them to use a social networking platform in their class makes sense in a lot of ways, right? It's a social space. They can set up peer learning groups and so on. So one of the issues that came up was that this platform flattened relationships between individuals. So on this platform, everyone could be a connection, but every connection was a friend. Right? Relationships could be of one type. And faculty members bemoaned the fact that they were losing control of pedagogical approaches that they deemed to be valuable to their teaching, that don't align with that idea of everyone being a friend. And really, they were losing control of a part of themselves, of a part of their identity. So if we look at scholarly identity online, we can look at it from multiple senses. It can be static, right? A faculty profile on a university website. It can be evolutionary. If you look at Facebook over time, you can see some sort of a historical continuity. It can be chaotic, right? You can have photos on Flickr, you can have a Facebook profile, you can have a Twitter profile, you can have a university institutional page. It can be multiple, right? You can showcase multiple aspects of yourself. And this leads us to consider these questions. So how is our online participation being structured by the tools that we use? And what are the assumptions of that structure? So why were the faculty members that I just mentioned uncomfortable? So Marshall McLuhan says that environments are invisible. Their ground rules and their pervasive influence impact how we act and function in the world. So when Google Plus and Facebook require us to use real names, and we get things like, the MySpace angle, the angle in our photographs when we have profiles on MySpace, we see that environment structure how we view and represent ourselves. So our experiences online and the ways that we participate are the result of someone else's architecture. And this is not new, by the way. We know that environments exert strong influence on behavior, strong influence on the activities that we use. And the classic example is the Stanford Prison Experiment. So this was an experiment where individuals were put in social roles. They were put into guard and prisoner roles. And these individuals quickly embraced that role and acted in the way that role was wanting to act. So if we go back to the technology, and we take a look at this image, so what you see is a swing, right? And it's a swing made of tires. But the tires were not originally developed so people can create swings, right? They were developed to move things around. They were repurposed to create a swing. So Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and so on are tools not originally built for education, but they've been adopted, appropriated into educational spaces and repurposed and used for us to achieve various goals. But when we embed these in educational spaces, there's two things that we need to recognize. First of all, that technology is not neutral. Technology is built with the developers' assumptions of the world in it, in the code. And the classic example is video games, right? A video game where a helpless princess needs to be saved by the brave prince. If we embed that video game in our environment, we're also embedding those assumptions in it. So going back to our case of using social media, the question is, what assumptions are the social networking sites making about relationships and identity that we're embracing by using them, that may be incompatible with education? So Google Plus and Facebook demand a real identity, right? They demand that we share our authentic identity with them. But Facebook was originally built for college students and the types of things that they do. They study, they get together, they hang out. So on the point of assumptions, this is not only true for software that we bring into education, but it's also true for software that we build for education. So Blackboard views education with a specific lens, right? It views it as, it views courses as modules, where you go in, you do your course, you get out, it ends at the end of the semester. The same with MOOC platforms. Nothing says that the MOOC should be made up of video lectures or discussion boards, but the more that happens, the more we come to see MOOCs in that way. We applied for a MOOC fellowship recently, and we were given a list of checkboxes to say what our MOOC was composed of. And it was checkboxes that essentially structured our MOOC to be lectures and quizzes and peer learning and so on. So the first story that I'd like to share relates to people congregating on social media. And in my writing, I recently described it as a place of gathering. So it's like gathering around the fire and sharing with each other. I'm going to share a personal story that helped me make sense of gathering and helped me make sense of these spaces. It's a story of connecting, embracing kind of unexpected outcomes and gathering. So I started using social media in 2007. And when I started using them, I had doubts about what they would be and what they could give me. And I was asking questions like, why would anyone care about my paper? Why would they care about what I had for breakfast? Why would they care if I like long walks on the beach? You know, that kind of stuff. What will happen when my students find out various things about their professor? So I joined social media relatively hesitant. But one of my first experiences with social media was with a website called couchsurfing.com. How many of you have heard of this website? Okay, a couple of you. All right, so couchsurfing is the idea of spending a night or two at a stranger's couch that offers it to you for free out of the goodness of their heart. And it's as crazy and as great as it sounds. So you go online, you join a community of couch surfers, and if you have connections to the place that they live at, you spend a night on their couch. So I can see, some of you thinking, I would never do this. I would never sleep at a stranger's couch. What if he's an axe murderer? I can see George still has all his limbs, so maybe he was lucky. But here's my experience. So I spent a day in Diamond City, Arkansas, and a day in Kansas City, Kansas, with a couple of people. And Diamond City, Arkansas is a small retirement town. You don't visit Diamond City unless you're passing through or unless your parents have retired there. It's that kind of a town. And Diamond City is also a dry county, which means that unless you bring your alcohol in the county, there's nowhere that you can buy alcohol in there. And I'm sharing this because it's relevant, I promise. So bear with me. So anyway, I stayed in Diamond City, and the people that hosted us first made dinner, and we had a wonderful conversation about the town and whatnot. And this was at the summertime. So after dinner, we sat outside at their porch and for some more chatting. But in the meantime, these people had invited all their friends to join us. And while we were sitting out there, I saw this group of people just coming with their chairs, with their instruments, and with their liquor on the other hand. See, that's related. Coming to play music for everyone. So they put together a good old-fashioned hootenanny for us. And that to me was a foreign concept at the time, right? It might be to some of you as well. So it's essentially an informal gathering where people come together, play folk music, chat, dance, and do all that stuff. So what does this really have to do with education and social media and scholarship? So in the world that I inhabit, education is about broadening your perspectives. It's about sharing. It's about learning about the world and recognizing injustices. It's about working towards a better society. And my social media experiences have been unexpectedly rewarding, bringing me together with people that bring me together face-to-face with people that I've met online, bring me together with people that have different experiences than I have. So I met friends and colleagues from all over the world. Some of you I know from social media, and I'll be meeting you face-to-face and chatting with you here pretty soon as well. But I wrote papers with people that I never met. I wrote recommendation letters for people that I never met. But by being open to the unexpected, by being open to serendipity, I've learned tremendously from the people that are around me. And that, to me, is the value of social media participation. It's kind of spaces of gathering, spaces of congregating and sharing. So my fifth story has to do with the social networking platform that I've mentioned already, where we implemented in this graduate program. So when asking instructors to use that platform to teach, we also asked them to abandon the platform that they were used to, right? And because this platform was going to be available to the students throughout their years at the university, we're expecting that they would form a community with each other, that they would use this space to congregate, that they would self-organize around topics of interest. We want to essentially persistent environment. But when we interviewed instructors about their experiences with the platform, we quickly learned that they came to use and make sense of this technology based on experiences that they had with other platforms in the past. So we saw two strong influences. The first one was that the learning management system that they had used in the past, which in this case was Blackboard, shaped the way that they were using the social network. So they used it as a filing cabinet. They didn't use any of the social networking features that were embedded in it. They cared about making assignments, announcements. They cared about putting assignments on there for their students. So essentially, the idea of the learning management system, or the idea of having a tool to use in your class, shaped all the other technologies that came after that in this case. So the LMS, in lots of ways, kind of had an iron grip on how new technologies are used. And it's unfortunate because the affordances provided by the new technology might allow us to do different things, right? But if we're used to the learning management system as a system to manage our classes, then we're not able to do that. So secondly, popular technology also impacted how they viewed the social networking platform. The platform was promoted and described as being like Facebook. And what that meant was that instructors came to expect that it would function as Facebook. And like most educational platforms, this one also had issues as well, right? So they came to expect that it would work at all times, that it would be aesthetically pleasing, that it would have no downtime. But all educational software, or pretty much quite a lot of them, have downtime. They're not aesthetically pleasing. And they don't work at all times. And it's fascinating that we really, as an education community, don't demand more out of the applications that we're using. But the takeaway here is that these people's experiences were shaped by their prior experiences with Facebook, by their prior experiences with the learning management system, and when given a platform that could support peer learning, that could support kind of the social constructivist ideals that these individuals even embraced in their face-to-face classes, they were not able to make that jump. So for my sixth story, I thought I would talk about our mandate as educators and researchers, as I've already put forth kind of the mandate of EdTech and education entrepreneurialism in the US. But I think there's a question that we need to ask ourselves as educators, designers, and researchers, and figure out where we are finding ourselves in this state of rediscovering educational technology, in this stage where a lot of people are interested in the field, and a lot of change is happening, and expected, right? So in my mind, what we need to do is to be involved in the future educational systems that are being designed right now. If we're not on the table as educators and researchers, someone else is going to design those systems for us. And whether those systems are going to have the values that we have as educators is questionable. And this is just my list of items or things to do. Advocacy, design development work, research with and on some of these platforms that are being developed, providing our input as educators, as teachers, as learners even, and partnerships with them. So the question that I can see some of you asking is, well, you're telling us these things, but what are you doing about it? And this is my latest or our latest endeavor. But my friend Audrey Waters and I have proposed to develop a MOOC on educational technology foundations and the history of education, theories of education and learning, to teach to designers and developers that are essentially new to the field. So questions like, what are the debates of the field? How is technology impacting education? How is pedagogy impacting education? What is the relationship between technology and pedagogy? What initiatives have been successful in the past? What initiatives have failed? Why did they fail? Right? These are important questions that unless you're enrolled in a master's program of educational technology, you don't have an opportunity to work with. So that URL right there is our application, and the first part of the proposal involves a public vote. So if you do think that this is important work, we'd love your vote. If you don't think that's important work, we still love you, and it's okay. But let's return to this. So social media use, some of it guided by the fascination about the technology, some of it actually having an impact, and some of it being used as a tool to circumvent current practice. In summary, it's clear that the world is gray, right? There's no black or white. And when we integrate social media in our research, in our practice, we should take into account what we've known from the history of the field and what the affordances of the technology are. So I'm going to leave you with that, and I've intentionally left some time for Q&A. But if you're interested more on this, that's my blog where I often put out my half-baked thoughts and my Twitter handle. And that's my email if you want to get in touch. I've uploaded this presentation on SlideShare this morning, so if you'd like a copy, you can go there and grab a copy. So with that, I think we could jump to Q&A, maybe?
So please join me in thanking George. Since this talk is actually being live streamed, we do ask that if you do have questions, if you would please come up to one of the two mics. I think that was a very thought-provoking, and I know I certainly am jotting down a couple things that I wanted to ask as you were wrapping up your talk. But is there any questions that anybody has? Okay. You have to come down to the mic, sorry.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. My name is Denise Nelson, and I'm an educational technology planner at SciAst, and I'm wondering your point of view on how to begin to think about planning for social media in the context of a polytechnic. We're evaluating, what should we be doing for communication, collaboration, and teaching and learning within the whole institute, and where do we begin thinking about social media?
Sure. That's an interesting question. So I think it's important to recognize where people are coming from, and it's also important to have a shared vision of where you want to go. So institutional conversations are important, and that it's also worthwhile to think about getting together with people to share successes and failures. So bringing people in that can talk about, how this has worked in their own institution, bringing people in that are at that institution and have been using social media that can describe to colleagues what it is like, right? Because there's nothing like hearing the colleague from next door say, oh, I did this and worked, or I did this and it didn't work, and so on. So I think those are some good steps, for starting at least.
What would be an example institution that you would recommend?
I think Stanford does great work on that domain. I think there are some interesting kind of research groups that do some of that outreach, and even though it's not, focused on the institution, you might learn some of that. You can look at the New Media Consortium. They have a good presence on social media.
Thank
Those two, yeah.
Hi, George. In the administrative world of institutions right now, there's a lot of talk about CRMs, which are customer relationship management systems,
Okay.
as a means of maintaining communication with students and having, I guess, a more comprehensive communication strategy for being able to reach our students, to talk to segments of our students or particular students through channels where hopefully the institution can make contact with those people before they enroll in the university, during their registration here, afterwards when they're alumni, and trying to tie that all together into an integrated, enterprise-level communication system. Now, I don't like them, but it is sort of the administrative fix for trying to manage mass communication to a wide variety of real people. Social media is kind of the other extreme, I think, where it's more chaotic, more fun, and probably where the students are. Do you have any thoughts about how those two extremes can be brought a little closer together?
Yeah. So I understand your concerns. I too am not comfortable with the idea of limiting ourselves to an enterprise system to do all of these things. And I'm more comfortable with the idea of figuring out how we can help our students through different channels and figuring out ways that we can help them self-organize. Right? So, for example, providing support for them to create a Facebook group and share and so on. At the same time, I can see the value of an enterprise system, especially when an institution has the goal of keeping in contact with the alumni, learning about what has worked and what hasn't. And I don't have a solution for you. My solution would be to not only try the enterprise system, but to also try and reach out in the different channels that are available out there. So in some ways, to not only pay some sort of a company to bring in the system and train us how to do it, but to also set up a group on campus that will have individuals that would be out there interacting with students on social media. Yeah.
So one of the concerns that always seems to come up whenever I've talked to faculty about social media use in classrooms in particular is always this notion that, not every student is going to be on that platform, or not every student is going to be benefiting from this, and I don't want to favor some students over other students in helping them have access to resources that will make them successful when the other students don't have access to that. Right. How have you historically responded to that as you kind of rolled out social media in what you're doing now? I did realize that most of your teaching is in educational technology, which is probably not the normal subset of students, but the flip side of that is always the counter-argument that I've heard, which is that every student is a digital native, which I know Heather, for example, gets very angry about when she hears that word. But this idea that, every student automatically knows how to do this, so therefore if I roll it out, there's no worry that students will have differing abilities with that technology. So those are, again, two extremes, but how do you manage those two?
Yeah. Well, the second one I managed by getting people to look at the literature and see that that's a myth that's debunked. And, the idea of the digital native is just blown out of proportion. But I would add that there's another tension there. And the tension is that students requiring students to join some sort of a social media group for a class might not be the best way to go about doing it, because there are individuals who might not want to reveal that they have a Facebook account for a while, for example, right? They might not want to network with their colleagues on social media. So what I try to do is promote the value and the pitfalls of participating on social media for my students, not necessarily as part of my class, but as part of their professional development. So showcasing to them how they can use it successfully, showcasing to them what they can gain out of it, what they can lose by participating on it mindlessly, right? And then making that connection to what they want to gain. So I think the conversation needs to start from, what is the value of these tools in a student's life, and how can we support them in getting there? Okay, cool.
On the Twitter back channel, there's a comment that you made that generated a couple quite humorous remarks by a few people, which is this idea that the LMS that we're using shapes how we approach the use of different new technologies that we're using, just as an example. And I think there was a couple of people from our campus that thought, oh God, is Blackboard shaping how I'm using everything in the future? As somebody who works a lot with faculty about kind of thinking through the pedagogical side of the implementation of these technologies, how do you get them, in your opinion or past experience, how have you got them past that immediate hurdle of trying to actually say, okay, quit thinking about it as a dump of repository of PDFs or things, and think about it fundamentally different in terms of how we might do things in new ways and have new experiences because of that.
Sure. Yeah. That's a great question, and I'm glad that the comments on Twitter are positive. But I think the conversation again needs to start from what are our values and what are we trying to achieve, recognizing kind of the power of pedagogy, right? Because if you have a great idea that's poorly implemented because of the pedagogy, it's gonna burn down to the ground. So starting with a conversation about what does teaching and learning look like in your classroom right now? What does the next level look like? And how can you use different approaches to get to that level? Right? And it might be that faculty members, especially those who don't breathe and live education on a daily basis, are not able to verbalize what that next level looks like, right? But I think everyone who's taught for a while has some ideas about what is going well and what's not going well. So starting from there and then thinking about, okay, how can we get there? Not necessarily thinking about the technology, but thinking about what actions we could take. Because it could be, a different pedagogical approach. It could be something simple like changing a process. It could be something like team teaching. It could be all sorts of things, right, that might not have anything to do with the LMS. But at the same time, again, going back to that question about social media use, I think it's valuable for faculty to get together with each other and showcase of where they were and where they got after one of these consultations and one of these conversations and how things have changed. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
We still have plenty of time, so I really do actively encourage others to get up and ask questions.
Yeah. Oh, and I should have said this already, but I'm generally uncomfortable with the lecture style, but I have to do it sometimes. So if you also have a response back, or if you have some ideas after a question, feel free to jump in and chime in. We could have a bigger conversation.
You made a comment early in your talk about Google Glass going to change everything. I wouldn't mind hearing more of your opinions about that.
Oh, sure. I was just alluding to the idea that some of these technologies might be changing the way we live. Not that they will, but there's a lot of talk about what changes when technology is integrated into our daily practice, right? So I go out to dinner, I check my phone, I check my email all the time just because I have access to it, right? And I didn't used to do that 5 years ago. So in the same way, when you have a tool that can take pictures and videos, the question comes up: well, is this going to change how people behave around each other when they have these glasses on them? Right? Maybe, maybe not. There's been a couple of cases of a restaurant, I believe, that has. Well, more as a marketing gimmick, but essentially said, if you have one of these glasses, we want to allow you to come here. Yeah. Now, if the question is it going to change education, based on all of this, I don't think so. And again, just because I think the power of pedagogy, or pedagogy is important, and we have not fully understood its power, even though we've been working in this field for a long time.
Again, on the back channel, there are some interesting thoughts about, you made a comment about how MOOCs kind of have become video lectures with discussion boards, and it's become this kind of model of MOOCs. And the question was asked, what would a Twitter-only MOOC look like, for example? Can that be a MOOC? What would it look like to actually say, you know what, we're going to ignore these MOOC platforms that are existing and actually just say, take advantage of some social media tools. So, i.e., could PhD chat become a MOOC? So what are your thoughts about what that might be?
Well, wasn't Twitter the original MOOC? Maybe it was. I mean, I think that so the original MOOCs, if you will, came out of this idea of getting people to connect with each other, right? And micro communities would form on Moodle, on Twitter, on other platforms that people were using, like Second Life at that time, right? So it was more an idea of getting people to talk to each other and getting people to work with each other, regardless of what the platform was, regardless of kind of what our goals were in lots of ways, right? Because in those original MOOCs, the curriculum, the learning objectives, those were very fluid, right? And it becomes very chaotic. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's no learning that's coming out of it, right? So, what was the question? Could you envision a MOOC that would be, absent of any of these platforms, just using Twitter? Yeah. So I can envision open learning happening anywhere, right? Now, whether it's massive or not, I think in lots of ways it's kind of beside the point. But I think that when people get together, network with each other on platforms that fulfill the purposes that they define for themselves, we have learning happening. So the PhD chat is an example of a learning community where if you want to put an umbrella, course or description around it, you would say it's the PhD journey. It's learning how to go through this journey, getting immediate help when you need it from your colleagues, right? For some people, it might look different than others, but hey, that's how a course looks like, right? When my students come to a 20-person class, they don't all come with the same learning experiences, and they get different things out of it. So the short answer is yes. Is it going to be as profitable as some of these companies are expecting it to be? Probably not, but we're talking about learning, so whole different debate. I can see Brad being eager to go to the mic again. So how about this? What do you guys think? That's a question that always goes well. Yeah.
I guess it's a two-part question. This morning we were talking about how do you provide value or how do you prove value as an instructional designer. I'd like your opinion on that. And also, you're going into being a research chair at Royal Roads. What type of research are you looking to move forward there?
Sure. Thank you for both of those questions. So how does an instructional designer add value is the first question? Or how do they prove the value that they've added? So how do they prove the value that they have added? So if we're looking at a course where an instructional designer works with a faculty member to develop and implement, right? We can look at various outcomes of that course, right? As a result of the work that an instructional designer has done, right? Learning outcomes, evaluations of experience, long-lasting impact, and all those things. So I think those metrics are important, and those metrics are valuable not just for an individual instructional designer, but for an institution as well. Now, for your second question, I'm continuing my research on understanding people's experiences and practices in emerging environments, and mostly focusing on kind of social networks and a little bit on open courses. And my students and I teach a class on online education and the future of learning that we just finished. But my students were tasked with joining a MOOC and keeping a diary of their experiences and essentially an ethnography of what it was to be in their different classes. So right now we're trying to figure out what to do with those ethnographies, and we're trying to figure out whether we would be able to publish them as a book describing essentially the lived experience of being in a MOOC, to share that with others. Because a lot of the conversation around open courses and massiveness gets lost in the numbers, right? We talk about 95% dropping out, or we talk about 10% succeeding. But when we ask, what is it like to go through a MOOC? What is it like to get together with all sorts of different people and talk about this content? We don't know what that is like. What is it like to sit in front of a monitor and take a course with 100,000 other students while you're still by yourself in your living room, right? I mean, do you even think about that when you're taking a class, right? So those are just some of the ideas that we'll be exploring in this. But overall, this idea of what is the lived experience of education mediated with technology is kind of the broad theme of my work.
Hello, Kurt Schroeder. You were just sort of touching on my question there, I think, at the end of your last comments. But my question was, we associate social media with generally positive outcomes. What are some of the negative consequences of using social media? Yeah. And would you, lack of face-to-face interaction as being one of them, for example. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the negative side?
Sure, absolutely. So towards the end of my talk, I made mention of the world, the world being gray, right? I don't do well with binaries, and I really should be seeing all of you as gray right now. That would make more sense to me. But yes. So there are negative outcomes, and I think that. So just some examples of those, right? We've seen a lot of cases of teachers posting things on social media that they should not have been posting, and were laid off, right? So the question that's important to me is how do you plan ahead for something like that, right? How do you get people to think about the web and social media as a place both for opportunity, but a place that they need to be mindful about when they participate there, right? So the idea of digital permanence, right? If you put something online, it's going to be there forever, right? And I think once people recognize that, then they might be able to think about more, or think twice about what they're posting, or how they could facilitate that space or those interactions that they have online for good, right? So can bad things happen online? Of course they can. They happen everywhere. They happen at the mall. They happen, in our neighborhoods. So I think that understanding what the opportunities and the risks are is where a lot of this conversation should start.
So looking forward, it's really hard to look forward with technology because you never quite know what you'll see next. If, for example, in September when this classroom fills up with students again and a quarter of them come equipped with Google Glass, it's going to change things. It's going to change the way faculty are, encountering students, how people are encountering one another. And these changes happen at kind of an unpredictable and very fast rate, I guess, in the world of technology generally. We're a little bit protected here because I think things seem to happen a bit more slowly in prairie universities than they might in some other places. But nevertheless, I think we are faced with risks of technology change that faculty have no idea how to cope with. Mm-hmm. And so often that coping is done just by saying, ban all that stuff from our campus. We don't want any video recording happening in this classroom unless I permit it, which is actually a rule that we've recently passed on our campus. We don't want to open the walls of the classroom. We want to make sure those doors are closed and we're safe and protected in here. But at the same time, of course, we have kind of this need for reaching out and expanding our reach to students abroad. So we're I think, a little bit struggling, I guess, with how we cope with technology changes that could change everything, and when we really don't want much to change, I think, as old faculty members. So this notion, I think, of the disruptive forces of technology, and lots of people talk about them, and they do have an impact on, I think, the way we work, the way we live, the way we teach. And the ability to stay out in front of that and make any kind of impact before we're in crisis mode and are only reacting to it, it seems to be a big challenge in the world of educational technology. And I guess I'm wondering if, there are no silver bullets, there's no magical answer, but at the same time, when new technologies are sprung upon us rapidly in classrooms, faculty behave in very weird and unpredictable ways sometimes, I think. Is there any advice for people who kind of try to work with and coach faculty along to help them with that transition, to help them deal with changes rather than simply block them out of the room?
That's a great question. I'd love to know the answer to that too.
Maybe somebody else in the room does. I'm looking for that.
So have any of you faced this phenomenon in your work, and how did you cope with it, I guess? Valerie has. Awesome.
I remember in 1993, I broke my right hand in university, so I couldn't write. And I asked my professors, could I record this, because I can't write with my left hand. I'm not one of those ambidextrous people, and I was told no. screw that, I recorded it anyway. So it's going to happen, and I'm actually quite surprised to hear that there's did you say a policy passed that would ban recording on campus? I'd be curious to know from a law professor, would that stand up? Because my understanding is of law that I could be in a private communication with you in your home, George. I could be recording it, and that's admissible in any court of law. So how does that law, does that trump the policy on campus? Yeah. Students are going to record. If I did it with a small little external mic sticking out of my bag in 1993, it's going to happen with the Google Glasses. People need to let go and start accepting that they need to let that expert, an invincible person who knows everything, aura disappear from a campus and show more of themselves and show that through their social media presence. And there was that study cited in the Chronicle, I think it was, where they looked at student perception of professor credibility. I'd like to see that one replicated to make sure that it does stand true. But they showed that the students rank those profs with social like personal tweets, with higher credibility than those who are just work only. So, what are the students wanting out of our post-secondary, and, what can we also control? We can't control the recordings. So that's my little point.
So what I'm hearing Valerie say is, blanket policies about banning various instruments are probably not going to work out.
Yeah, we still have faculty who ban laptops in the classroom.
And if I can add to that, it's a great question, and how do you balance that against the needs of those students who may not be physically injured, but who have an accessibility issue? They're blind, they can't hear, or they can't, this or that. And the technology for these people is absolutely very profound and necessary for them in order to advance in their education. And so, we can't be blanket policy and say you can't do this or that, because we may be excluding people, so we have to be careful.
And I guess I have more of a comment as well than a question.
Great.
I always used to hear in classrooms, "Deirdre, stop writing and pay attention to me." And now I hear, "Deirdre, stop tweeting and pay attention to me."
So I've seen a couple of my students working with Pinterest. So it's going to be something different, right?
So I have a completely different question again, and this is one where campuses, at least in Canada, have really struggled with this notion of this responsibility to protect the personal privacy of our students, and so we have freedom of information and protection of privacy legislation, and which in some ways causes the institution to close things down, to actually have password protected everything, and this notion that we need to actually have it within the firewall, and the tools that we're going to use need to be protected in that way. And the opposite concern in many campuses, and Valerie spoke this morning about a challenge in BC where there are certain tools that they won't roll out as institutional systems unless they're actually, the servers reside in Canada, according to BC legislation now, because you can't possibly have American servers running the things, because then this information is open to the Patriot Act, and there's all sorts of other kind of connotations to what, who gets control and ownership over, for example, personal information of students. Yeah. So I was wondering how usually as you speak more about these open social media systems, social media tools, so many of them, there's no way you could possibly password protect them or close them down, and nor would you want to. That's counter to the whole point. So how do you balance that privacy issue with the need for openness and the balance there?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if the problem is necessarily. So I feel that the problem is on a policy level, and again is an area where we or you who are interested in the topic individuals who are interested in the topic could be involved with in advocating for our values and advocating for the types of things that we'd like to see happen. So, from an education perspective, we've seen the value of openness, and we've seen the value of what happens when people get together to across borders and across technologies to work with each other. Now, if legislation is preventing some of that, I think that's space for us to advocate and try to change policy.
Hi, I'm Pat Timchat, and I'm from SciAst, and you got my attention, I don't know if I got it right, but you did a study and you moved from the learning management system to something else, and you were surprised to find out that the people just basically use the system the same way that was done on the LMS. And my question is most of the studies actually show that instructors or profs teach the same way that they were taught to. 90% of them will teach that way, and you got about 10% who's going to dabble with this and that. And even here you're using PowerPoint, and we're not twittering, we're doing the hashtag on the side, but we're not actually showing it on the screen. And so my question is if you guys, well, maybe me, maybe if we're all into this technology stuff and we're still doing it the same way, then how would we expect people who haven't even seen anything different to get on board? So in that study, was there anything done to actually educate people on how to use stuff differently? Because for me, it's still new stuff, even though I've used a few different things in my classroom, but most of it's because I've been tweeting and getting some ideas from other people, but I haven't actually sat in a classroom and seen anyone use the multimedia in some kind of great idea. And I'm one of those people who've, what is it called? 90% of us who die out of MOOCs because it's way too mooky, I guess I'd say.
Yeah. So just to quickly answer the question about the support, the answer is yes, all of the individuals had one-to-one support for each of their classes, and not just into how to integrate the technology, but how it could integrate with specific pedagogical practices that they valued. And the issue was, not necessarily that these individuals were enacting pedagogies that were not powerful or that were not progressive, or that were not things that we have generally aspired towards. These were amazing instructors that research pedagogy in their day-to-day life, right? So they can understand, they understand how things work, and they understand how things could improve. And I think the problem lies in recognizing technology not just as a tool to do something, to achieve X, right, but seeing it as a learning environment. That was one of the things that came out of that study, is that they continue seeing the platform as a tool to do X. So it's a tool for my students to get a syllabus. It's a tool for my students to post their lesson plans, right? But I think when we take that perspective, we're missing out all the other things that could, that environment could add if we actually see it as a space, as an environment where learning happens, right? So maybe on that level, there needs to be a better conversation about what that could add.
So can you give us an example exactly of that?
Of that?
Yeah.
An example of what that conversation would look like, or an example of what? An example of what?
Yeah, be not the example of the conversations, because I've had lots of conversations. What are you seeing or envisioning as the learning, and versus this is a tool to do this, X?
Yeah.
So the learning environment.
Sure. So a simple one would be creating a forum at the beginning of class and saying, this class is about, I don't know, pedagogical strategies for science education. What do you guys know about the topic? What do you want to know more about? and how can we get there? And starting a conversation about where we are, where the students are, where they want to go, and taking those conversations to co-construct a syllabus for the class, right? So that would be a simple example.
I wish my institution would let me do that.
So, Darrell, the last question.
Sure. Thanks, Brad. My name is Darrell at the University of Saskatchewan. You had mentioned that you've seen some interesting things done with Pinterest. What are some innovative and interesting ideas that you've seen done
they were
with Pinterest?
not interesting. They were students just browsing Pinterest while I was talking. Yeah. Or maybe it was interesting for them, I guess. I don't know.
So please join me in thanking again George for...